I'm here to um, request the Labour Left Alliance to take a strong stance in defence of Julian Assange. For those of you who may be aware, the word torture comes from the Latin, which is to twist, and that is essentially a way of hurting somebody without shedding blood, in terms of the Christian principles. And essentially, that's what's been done to Julian Assange over the years. For those of you who may not know, I'd like to encourage you to put yourselves in the shoes of Khalid El Masri. He was um, um, a German citizen of Lebanese descent, and he was abducted by the CIA, sodomized, tortured for several months until they decided it was a case of mistaken identity. And they continued to torture him for a further few months, after which they, um, once they got to their decision, they then let him loose on the Albanian border from where he was deported back to Germany, where nobody believed his story. And it was only because of the WikiLeaks releases, where both Cablegate as well as releases in relation to the torture of Mr. El Masri, that Mr. El Masri got some amount of restitution through the European Court of Human Rights. Now, Mr. El Masri's case is not unique. As many of you will know, American imperialism and British involvement in supporting that, or in fact leading it in some cases, has led to a complete legitimization of American imperialist behavior all over the world. And the role that WikiLeaks and Julian Assange have played in addressing this has been both in terms of the wonderful innovation that WikiLeaks did in terms of allowing whistleblowers to provide large volumes of information in a secure way to journalists, but also for that documentation to have its own security, in that WikiLeaks still holds a 100% accuracy record, which none of the mainstream media can even aspire to. In order to prevent us from recognizing what a trailblazer and pathbreaker Julian Assange was, and to avoid us from following his example in making governments accountable to the people for us to surveil the state rather than for the state to surveil us, a number of efforts have been undertaken, predominantly by Britain, America, Sweden, Ecuador, and Australia, in order to suppress both whistleblowers and Mr. Assange. He's currently in Belmarsh prison, despite the court having decided, and I was a legal observer at this trial, having decided that Mr. Assange cannot be extradited to the US. And the joke about this was the judge said she wanted to be fair to the Americans in order that they would be able to carry their appeal more seriously. In all of this, what Mr. Assange has been arbitrarily confined in the Ecuadorian embassy, where his privileged conversations with his lawyers were spied upon, where his conversations with his medical experts were spied upon. He was not able to leave the embassy. The British government, particularly the Metropolitan Police, was involved in spending tens of millions of pounds surveilling the embassy, which, as anybody who works in relation to women's rights will recognize, the British don't really care about women's rights, in the British government at least, in the way in which they prosecute women's rights and deal with issues related to sexual violence. So this was about the state clamping down on a journalist. And what has happened as a result of Mr. Assange's case is that it is criminalizing both journalism and anybody who accepts classified data, who is a recipient of it. And this case is really important for activists, because if you were to disclose information that the American government found uncomfortable or opposed to their so-called national interests, they would be able to pluck you out, extradite you to the United States, and put you in a maximum security prison where you will spend 22 hours a day in solitary confinement. In that prison, Mr. Assange, were he to be extradited, would be allowed individual recreation, where he would be moved from his bare, small cell to the next bare, small cell to spend some time individually recreating. And then, in addition to that, were his conversations, even pre-conviction, would be censored by the FBI. He wouldn't be able to talk freely to his lawyers or to his family. He would be allowed 2 15-minute calls a day. What Julian has done for the world has been to allow us to see what's really going on. Were it not for him, we would not know the realities of the Iraq and Afghan war. We would not know the realities of Trafigura dumping toxic waste outside the Ivory Coast. We have to recognize that this is a case of states colluding to support free speech, and those on the left must coalesce around this case, because it is not just about Mr. Assange, which is what much of the story tends to be about, vilifying him, talking about his personality, discussing whether he smears feces on the wall. It is about the right of people to know the crimes that governments commit in our name. I'm really grateful to be here alongside the person who took the Assange case to Parliament in a meaningful way, Chris Williamson, and other activists who are here to, like David Miller, who recognize how important this case is for all of us. So I'd be very grateful for your support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Comrade. Thank you for joining us today. Very important campaign, and we're definitely in support of it. It's why we spend the second point of our charter is on that case and in favor of whistleblowers from all levels.